Why specifically the Underworld? What drew you to that?
Yeah, well, I think I look back at it, and this is kind of is retrofitting, I guess, but it had a sort of gravitational logic. I just kept heading downwards, so I started on the mountains, and then I ended up writing a book called The Wild Places, which was more about moors and forests and islands. And then I wrote a book called The Old Ways, which was about tracks and paths, which are the beginnings of the underworld in a way, because they're kind of beaten down into the land a little bit. And the deepest of them are called holloways. You get them on sandstone, green stone. They're hundreds of years old, and basically water and wheels and feet have cut this soft rock, bedrock, up to 20 feet down into the landscape. So they're like gorges, and you enter them, and you're entering a different dimension. The shadow, they can't be farmed because they're too deep. Gits in 4x4s sometimes mash them up because they think that affirms their penis length or self-perceived masculinity. Green laners and off-roaders anyway, it's another mindset I can't comprehend. And then just begin to and then that was the sort of portal transition zone, was the holloway. And then I also think it's something to do with being a bit older, and the underworld's about graves and loss and burial and memory and grief and all the things that have circled all of us, particularly the last 15, 18 months.
I suppose one of the things that's obvious is that something that is so which is so close to us, adjacent with us, that we literally stand on, is so full of mystery. There's something of the sort of horror of psychedelics in it for me, like not the beauty, the grace, the enlightenment, the epiphany of psychedelics, but like some experiences when I was younger, where suddenly the certainty of self was cleaved and cast asunder, and I thought, oh my god, I'm not me at all. And there's something terrifying about that. I like in one of the early stories where you talk about you're having all these experiences, and then you put your head up, and I now recognise, right, you were somewhere else, and like there's cars and people listening to the radio, and they got their arm out the window and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's bewildering.
Oh, it's totally bewildering. And colour is colour again. Like green, I've never seen a greener green than the green I saw after 2.5 days in the Paris catacombs. And somebody was playing music from one of the high windows. I remember when we emerged from the catacombs and came out the old railway tunnel that we'd got access into it through, and I'd never heard music like it, even though I had heard that music before. So it is the bardo, like it's the Tibetan bardo, the rebirth, where you pass through a tunnel, a channel, and that's a pilgrimage, but it's also a return to the surface. So yeah, and you feel like you've come back from another world, and you have. And I gave a very specific example, like when the Chilean miners, those miners who got trapped, everyone, that world fixating story. They came back from, all of them were saved, but they came back in a capsule one by one that was co-designed by the Chilean scientists and government and NASA. And it just made perfect sense. They were coming back from another galaxy, another world. The one we walk on, as you say, like an inch away from us is the rhizosphere. 10 meters away from us is bedrock. A few kilometers away from us is deep crust. I mean, we live in this tiny boundary layer between the wildnesses of the upper atmospheres and the inconceivable darkness and forces of the crust and the core.
Because what you were dealing with in the book, and it seems more broadly in your writing, is where an investigation into the unknown, how close to us the unknown is, how all the sovereignty of knowledge is surrounded on all sides by this kind of wilderness that may yet be unknowable. It feels to me that that sacredness, mystery, and religiosity are forever present in the writing. Are you curious about spirituality and religion, and are you, as many people who I think are influenced retrospectively now by your writing, what do you think about the idea that a kind of a reinvigoration of certain spiritual principles is what's required to sort of reawaken a kind of a reverence for one another, for ourselves, for the world?
It's a very beautiful question, and at risk of collapsing its fragility, I'm just going to say that someone started a leaf blower up in the next door garden, so I'm just going to shut the window to see if that keeps the noise down a bit, and then I'll get back to spirituality. Hold on. Hello.
I'm in a different mood now. I've changed. I'm no longer the person that I was before you closed that window.
It's all gone. I will convey our mutual complaints in triplicate to said leaf blower. And do you know, outraged of Croydon.
There's also no point in blowing those leaves.
But there it is. I mean, the leaf blower. What a ridiculous. Anyway, let's not. I'm going to become a leaf blower bloviator if you set me going on that one. But it doesn't sound like the angry old man I am. I've already done 4x4s. What's happening to me? It's all about the combustion engine. Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to hear you on this, Russell. I know. I mean, you've thought a great deal about these things. I don't know. I think if I had to kind of print up the spirituality business card, it would probably say something like mystical materialist, which is to say, as we've already discussed, I'm kind of utterly fascinated by how little we know, and by how the material world is forever astonishing us with its with its dark matter, let's put it like that, with the extent of its secrets. And we might take the example of the Wood Wide Web, the mycorrhizal fungal network that you discussed with Merlin, that I write about in the book. You know, Western science discovered that through the pioneering work of Suzanne Simard about a quarter of a century ago. Indigenous cultures have known about it. It's been self-evident to them that trees talk to each other and have social networks for thousands of years. Dark matter, our knowledge of that is a century old, but really we know nothing of it. So I think of us as these, this arrogant species that wanders, holding up a little flickering taper inside this immense cave, and think we can see it all, when in fact we only illuminate a little patch on the wall, and then we arrogantly hubristically work out from that. So mystic in the sense that I cherish ignorance, because I see it as a kind of impulse, really, and that I find miracles in the made world, the given world. What about you? What, particularly thinking about it in relation to sort of nature and the natural world?
I'm thinking about it in relation specifically to your book, and I know that sort of like Merlin has been explicit about an irritation that I recognise in the rush to sort of mystify or claim on behalf of mystery or some new, perhaps crystal encrusted, Gnostic stinking dogma, like, look, see, we told you that the double-blind experiment leads to this. And like you said, like you could draw the idea that there are mother trees, but that's so sort of anthropomorphic and sort of clumsy and agenda-led. But what I found in your book, like, and I suppose what excited me was like whenever you're talking about the relationships with sort of the characters in there, like that couple, that are in Italy or wherever it was, or Merlin, or that woman in Paris, and like I felt like you played some really interesting games, like a woman in a wedding dress and all the moths in Paris and stuff. I was like, does this even really happen? And I was trying to think about sort of as a writer, the kind of liberties that you may have taken and what you might have done with the timeline and stuff like that. And like, that you you're obligated to make sense of certain things as a writer with the kind of with the requirements of the discipline, I suppose. But the thing that sort of it touched me on a kind of, I suppose, on a sort of a religious level is that the ongoing, almost involuntary, and not to diminish what you have achieved as a writer, how could I after all those quotes, but like it seemed like the sort of effortless correlative between mystery and the practical, between the material and the mystery, and like perhaps most what weird word to use in this context, but most obviously in that sort of extraordinary story about the study of weakly interacting massive particles. And I talked about that to a few friends afterwards, and I felt like that, that if that is a material, physical reality, that's happening completely imperceptibly, that we are, like you said, we are living in a kind of virtual oblivion, and that which can only be detected will have to necessarily become a part of our ethos. If what we're going to wait for is for everything to be rationalized, measured, materialized, I feel like I know where the momentum of that idea is taking us. I feel where I know where rationalism is taking us. Materialism, consumerism, individualism. If that that we're going to have to evoke once more the mystery. And in your example of the oracles and the reading of the vapors, and of course that is delightfully analogous to the sort of geological studies that you cited. But for me, is this a continual attempt to sort of squeeze the mystery through the toothpaste tube of rationalism that is part of the problem? That is I think that because of the hubris that I associate with materialism and rationalism, at least in terms of its practice and in terms of its results, I feel that there needs to be a kind of a surrender to nature, a kind of reverence for the poetics that is discovered in an endeavor such as yours, that, oh my God, this is exactly like going within. Wow, that's indistinguishable from that myth. How are these patterns, why are these patterns continually iterating again and again? Why is that happening? And in our attempts to understand it, there's necessarily a reductivism, and in that I think we lose the thing that is most beautiful and most necessary. What I most firmly believe, what I most strongly believe, is that what is required is the reintroduction of reverence, of the sacred into ordinary life, the acceptance of our limitations. I can't think of another, forgive the word, weapon that can be mobilized against these kind of oppressive forces. And it feels like much of the kind of class of people that I deal with are like up for sort of, to a point, examining and exploring these ideas, but not to the point where it gets all shamanistic and Rasputin-like and crazy. And for understandable reasons, one way lies fascism, another way a kind of giddy idiocy. But I feel that we're going to have to start using these forces, because I think the alternative is becoming more menacing. If you're enjoying this conversation, join me over at Luminary on Apple Podcasts for the rest of our discussion and for all the latest episodes of Under the Skin.